The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never hosted a more charged atmosphere. 53 residents packed into folding chairs, with another dozen standing along the walls. Karen sat at the defendant's table, though nobody had officially called it that, with her color-coded binders and a legal pad covered in talking points. Board Vice President Dave McKenzie called the meeting to order with all the gravitas of someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas. We're here to address the unauthorized draining of the community pool by HOA President Karen Pemberton. Unauthorized is a strong word, Karen interrupted, standing before anyone could stop her. As president, I have emergency powers clearly outlined in Section 4.7 of our bylaws. She held up her highlighted copy like evidence in a murder trial. Sit down, Karen. Linda Walsh snapped from the treasurer's seat. You've done enough damage. But Karen remained standing, her audience captive. She'd spent 3 hours rehearsing this moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow to news that a child has contracted a serious illness from contaminated pool water. Imagine explaining to that child's parents that we had warning signs, but chose to ignore them because it was inconvenient. Her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who'd given many presentations to many skeptical audiences. What warning signs? Called out Janet Morrison from the third row. McGill said the water was tested and certified clean. Karen clicked to her first slide. Yes, she prepared a PowerPoint presentation. These photographs, taken from my kitchen window yesterday evening, clearly showed discoloration consistent with algae contamination. The room erupted in murmurs as residents squinted at the projected image of what looked like normal pool water with some green reflections. Karen, Dave McKenzie said slowly, that's tree reflection. That's what they want us to believe, Karen replied, and immediately regretted the conspiratorial tone that had crept into her voice. She could see several residents exchanging glances. What I mean is, when health and safety are at stake, we can't afford to take chances. Tom Henderson stood up in the back row, his face flushed. My 8-year-old son has been looking forward to his pool party for months. 20 kids were supposed to be here today. You ruined a child's birthday because you saw tree shadows in the water. The crowd murmured in agreement, and Karen felt her carefully constructed defense beginning to crumble. But something in Tom's accusatory tone triggered her deepest instincts. Your son will have many more birthdays, she said, her voice rising. But if he'd gotten sick from contaminated water, that might not be the case. I'm sorry his party was inconvenienced, but I prioritize children's health over children's entertainment. Oh, come off it, Karen, shouted someone from the back. You've been trying to shut down every community event since you moved here. This isn't about health. This is about control. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Karen looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors she tried to protect, a community she tried to serve, and saw nothing but anger and disappointment. I've given 5 years of my life to this community, she said quietly, her voice barely carrying to the back of the room. Every decision I've made has been to maintain the standards that protect all of our investments. If you can't see that, she trailed off, gathering her papers. The pool refill will cost approximately $22,000, Linda announced. Karen, the board is voting on whether to hold you personally responsible for this expense. Karen felt the room spinning slightly. $22,000. Her and Richard's vacation fund. Her daughter's wedding contribution. The kitchen renovation they'd been planning. I motion for a community-wide vote, she said suddenly. Let the residents decide whether my actions were justified. Dave McKenzie looked surprised. Karen, I don't think. Section 8.3 allows for community referendums on major issues. Karen continued, finding her footing again. This is clearly a major issue. The room fell silent. In the quiet, Karen could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sound of a lawn mower. She'd just bet everything on the hope that her neighbors would understand her motivations, even if they disagreed with her methods. By 10:30 am, Karen's phone had received 14 missed calls, 27 text messages, and 1 voice message from HOA Board Treasurer Linda Walsh that began with words Karen had never heard Linda use before. The community Facebook page, which Karen monitored religiously, was erupting with posts ranging from confused to furious to oddly supportive. "Well?" demanded her husband Richard as he stood in their marble-tile foyer, still holding his briefcase. He'd driven back from his law office after receiving what he described as the most embarrassing phone call of my professional career from fellow board member Dave McKenzie. Karen sat at her kitchen island, surrounded by printed emails, HOA bylaws, and a half-eaten yogurt parfait. She'd spent the last 2 hours preparing her defense, color-coding her documentation, and practicing her presentation in front of the hallway mirror. "I saved this community from a public health crisis," she said, though the words felt less convincing than they had at dawn. Someone had to act decisively. "Karen." Richard set down his briefcase with the careful precision of a man choosing his words. "The pool was fine. The water was tested by certified professionals. You drained $18,000 worth of water and chemicals because you didn't like the way it looked from our kitchen window." "It wasn't just how it looked," Karen protested, pulling up the photos on her phone. "Look at this green tinge. That's clearly algae contamination. And that's tree reflection." Richard's voice rose to a pitch she'd never heard before. "Karen, that's literally the reflection of our oak tree in the water. A tree that's green because it has leaves." The words hit her like cold water, but Karen's defensive instincts kicked in immediately. She'd been questioning the same thing herself for the past hour, staring at the photos and trying to convince herself she hadn't made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Even if the color was tree reflection," she said carefully, "the principle remains sound. Better safe than sorry when it comes to community health. The board will understand once I present the full context." Richard's laugh held no humor. "The emergency board meeting is in an hour. Dave McKenzie is calling for your immediate removal as president. Linda wants to explore legal action for destruction of property. And the Hendersons are talking about suing for intentional interference with their son's birthday party." Karen felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Legal action? That's ridiculous. I was protecting them." "From what, Karen? From clean water? From their own children having fun?" Richard sat down across from her, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like pity. "When did you become this person?" The question hung in the air like chlorine gas. Karen stared at her husband of 22 years and realized she didn't have an answer. When had maintaining community standards become more important than community happiness? When had her vigilance turned into something that looked, from the outside, like sabotage? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Lady, you're either crazy or brilliant. Either way, respect. Unit 47. Despite everything, Karen felt a small smile tug at her lips. Maybe she wasn't completely alone in this fight. "I need to prepare for the board meeting," she said, gathering her papers. "They need to understand the bigger picture." Richard shook his head. "The bigger picture is that you drained a pool, Karen. Everything else is just noise." But as Karen headed upstairs to change into her most authoritative blazer, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was about much more than one pool, one morning, and one arguably impulsive decision. This was about the kind of community Willowbrook Estates was going to be. Karen Pemberton stood in her designer athleisure wear at 6:47 am, industrial-grade garden hose in hand, watching 20,000 gallons of crystal-clear community pool water cascade into the storm drain. The newly filled pool, which had cost the Willowbrook Estates HOA $18,000 to repair and refill after winter damage, was now hemorrhaging water at an alarming rate thanks to her emergency drainage protocol. "Ma'am, what the hell are you doing?" shouted Miguel Santos, the pool maintenance supervisor, as he rounded the corner of the clubhouse. His coffee mug crashed to the concrete, shattering into ceramic fragments that perfectly matched Karen's expression when she realized she'd been caught. "I'm protecting our property values," Karen declared, adjusting her rhinestone-studded reading glasses with the authority of someone who'd been HOA president for 3 consecutive terms. "That pool water was clearly contaminated. I could smell the chlorine imbalance from my kitchen window." Miguel stared at her, then at the rapidly emptying pool, then back at her. "Lady, we literally just balanced the chemicals yesterday. The health inspector signed off on it this morning. We were opening for the season in 2 hours. Karen's grip tightened on the hose. This was exactly the kind of insubordination she'd been fighting since moving to Willowbrook Estates 5 years ago. Nobody understood the burden of maintaining community standards. Nobody appreciated the vigilance required to keep property values from plummeting due to negligence. I have documentation, she announced, pulling out her phone to show him a blurry photo she'd taken through her kitchen window. This water has a distinctly green tint. Algae buildup, potentially dangerous bacteria. As HOA president, I have the authority to make emergency decisions to protect residents. That's not algae. That's the reflection of the trees. McGill's voice cracked with disbelief. And you can't just drain a pool without. Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that the president may take immediate action when health and safety concerns arise. Karen interrupted, reciting the clause she'd memorized after highlighting it in 3 different colors. I've already sent notices to all residents explaining the temporary closure. What she hadn't mentioned was that she'd sent those notices to herself first, printed them on official letterhead, and was planning to distribute them after the dramatic pool drainage was complete. The timing was crucial. She needed this mess cleaned up before the Henderson family's pool party this afternoon. The Hendersons, with their 4 screaming children and their habit of inviting half the neighborhood over for barbecues, represented everything wrong with modern community living. McGill pulled out his phone, presumably to call someone in authority. This is going to cost thousands to refill. The board is going to. The board will thank me when they realize I've prevented a potential lawsuit, Karen said, though her voice carried the slightest tremor of uncertainty. She'd been so focused on stopping the Henderson party that she hadn't fully calculated the financial implications. But surely the board would understand once she explained the algae situation. They had to understand. As the last of the water gurgled down the drain, Karen felt a familiar surge of satisfaction, mixed with a growing knot of dread. She'd made her point, protected the community, maintained standards. So why did McGill look like he was about to call the police? 3 weeks later, Karen stood in her bathroom at 5:30 am, applying concealer to the dark circles that had become permanent fixtures under her eyes. Today was referendum day, the day her neighbors would decide whether she was a vigilant protector or a destructive menace. The campaign had been brutal. Tom Henderson had organized Team Rational with matching t-shirts that read "Pools are for swimming, not paranoia." Karen's supporters, and she was surprised to discover she had some, called themselves Team Standards and wore blue ribbons that proclaimed safety first. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Emma in Portland. "Mom, I saw the news story. Are you okay?" The news story. Channel 7's investigative reporter had somehow gotten wind of Poolgate, as social media had dubbed it, and turned it into a human interest piece about HOA overreach. Karen had watched herself on television the night before, looking wild-eyed and defensive as she explained her algae theory to a skeptical journalist. Richard appeared in the bathroom doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Their conversations had been stilted and careful since the initial board meeting, like 2 diplomats from warring nations forced to share breakfast. "How are you feeling?" he asked, and she could hear the genuine concern beneath his exhaustion. "Like I'm about to find out what my neighbors really think of me," Karen replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." She looked at him in the mirror. "What do you mean?" "Karen, when was the last time you had a real conversation with any of our neighbors? Not about violations or regulations or property values, but just talking?" The question caught her off guard. She tried to remember the last time she'd chatted with Janet Morrison about anything other than her fence height, or when she'd asked the Patel family about their daughter's college plans instead of their landscaping choices. "I talk to people all the time," she said defensively. "You talk at people. About rules. About problems. When did you stop being curious about their lives?" Before Karen could answer, her phone rang. Linda Walsh's name appeared on the screen. "The early voting numbers are in," Linda said without preamble. "It's closer than anyone expected." Karen's heart jumped. "How close?" 47% support your position, 43% oppose, 10% undecided. "Karen, I don't know what you did during this campaign, but you've actually convinced people. After hanging up, Karen stared at herself in the mirror. 47%. Nearly half of her neighbors believed she'd done the right thing, even if her methods were questionable. I need to go vote, she said. The community center was buzzing with activity when Karen arrived. A line of residents stretched from the voting booth to the parking lot. She recognized most of the faces, people she'd served notices to, people she'd argued with at board meetings, people she'd tried to protect whether they wanted protection or not. Karen, Mrs. Chen from Unit 23 waved her over. I wanted to thank you. Thank me. My grandson has severe asthma. If there had been any chance that pool water was contaminated, she shrugged. Better safe than sorry, right? As Karen waited in line, more neighbors approached her, some to argue, some to thank her, some just to satisfy their curiosity about the woman who'd become the center of their community's biggest controversy in decades. You know what's funny? Said Pete Williams, the retired teacher from Unit 15. This whole mess has gotten people more engaged with the HOA than anything in years. We've got 3 new candidates running for the board. Neighbors are actually talking to each other about community issues instead of just complaining on Facebook. Karen hadn't considered that angle. Her pool drainage disaster had accidentally created the kind of community engagement she'd been trying to foster for years through rule enforcement and property maintenance. When she finally cast her ballot, voting to uphold her own decision felt surreal but necessary. Karen lingered outside the community center. Win or lose, everything was about to change. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw you on the news. Starting an HOA in my neighborhood. Can I hire you as a consultant? Serious inquiry. Despite everything, Karen smiled. Maybe there was life after Willowbrook Estates after all. The voting closed at 8 p.m. Results would be announced at 9. Karen had 1 hour to figure out who she wanted to be when this was all over.